above the turbulent atmosphere of Gustav-IV. The marine assault carrier Valiant hovered ominously. Within its steel confines, hundreds of Marines prepared for the descent into chaos, none more focused than Titus Miller. His face, scarred from battles past, was set in a mask of grim determination as he systematically checked each piece of his gear. The briefing room was abuzz with the final preparations for the assault. Officers moved briskly between the ranks of soldiers, distributing maps and last-minute intelligence on the colony's layout and the estimated enemy positions. The hum of the carrier's engines provided a constant backdrop to the growing tension among the troops. Titus, standing by his locker, methodically assembled his missile launcher, each piece clicking into place with practiced ease. His fellow Marines, some visibly anxious, glanced his way, drawing silent reassurance from his stoic demeanor. "Miller, you good?" asked Sergeant Knox, approaching with a clipboard under his arm. Always, Titus responded without looking up, securing the last component of his weapon. Knox nodded, his expression heartening as he glanced down at his notes. "We're expecting heavy resistance. Intel suggests the Richter Alliance has fortified the central sector heavily. Anti-air turrets, sniper nests, you name it." Titus finally looked up, his eyes cold but alert. "Let them come. We'll break through. We always do." Knox clapped him on the shoulder, a brief moment of camaraderie amidst the looming storm. "I'll hold you to that, Miller. Remember, we're not just there to clean house. There are civilians counting on us." The reminder of the colonists tightened Titus's jaw just a notch. "They won't have to wait long," he murmured. As the briefing concluded, the Marines filed out towards the deployment bays. The clatter of armor and weapons filled the corridor, a metallic symphony that crescendoed as the dropships powered up, their engines a roar of anticipation. Titus secured his helmet, his reflection in the visor showing nothing of the turmoil that might have plagued a lesser experienced soldier. Instead, there was only resolve, the kind honed by 15 years of relentless conflict. The dropship's interior was cramped, the air thick with the scent of oil and sweat. As the craft began its descent, the violent shakes from the atmospheric entry mirroring the adrenaline that surged through Titus's veins. He remained focused, reviewing the mission parameters in his mind. 5 minutes to drop. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms, barely audible over the roar. Around him, Marines checked their gear, performed last-minute checks on their weapons, and exchanged looks that needed no words. They were a unit, a single force driven by a shared purpose, to save those who could not save themselves. As Gustav-IV grew closer, visible through the small portholes as a swirling mass of red and black, Titus felt the familiar pull of battle. It was a pull that had defined his life, a call to arms that was as much a part of him as his very breath. "Lock and load," he called out, his voice steady and sure over the din. The dropship shuddered as it passed through the last layers of turbulence, the volcanic surface of Gustav-IV looming ominously close. Below them, the colony, now a battlefield, awaited their arrival. The mission was clear, the enemy known, and the stakes higher than ever. As the dropship touched down, shrouded in the ashen shadows of the bearded planet, Titus was the first to step out, his missile launcher ready, his mind set on the fight ahead. This was more than just another battle, it was a mission of salvation, and he was ready to lead the charge. The terrain of Gustav-IV was as unforgiving as the enemies that occupied it. Volcanic ash fell like gray snow, blanketing the ground and clouding the air, reducing visibility to a mere few meters in some places. The ground underfoot was uneven, a mixture of hardened lava rock and softer, ash-laden soil that shifted unpredictably with each step. Intermittent tremors sent vibrations up through the boots of Titus and his fellow Marines, a constant reminder of the planet's instability. Titus's Centuria, the spearhead of the assault from the south, advanced in a tight formation. The visibility or lack thereof made traditional maneuvers risky, and the Marines relied heavily on their helmets' enhanced imaging systems to navigate and identify threats. "Visibility's a nightmare," muttered Corporal Vargas, who was positioned to Titus's left, his rifle scanning the obscured horizon. "Keep your eyes on your scopes and stay sharp." "We're walking into a hornet's nest," Titus replied, his voice calm but authoritative, cutting through the static of the comm link. As they neared the outskirts of the colony, the resistance suddenly stiffened. Shots rang out, the bright flashes of gunfire momentarily piercing the ash-filled air, signaling the presence of Richter Alliance forces. Contact. Enemy positions ahead, shouted Sergeant Lin, as she ducked behind a large chunk of volcanic rock, returning fire. Titus moved up to a vantage point, his missile launcher ready. Through the thermal imaging on his visor, he could see the heat signatures of the enemy's foxhole, a heavily fortified position with machine guns that had a clear line of fire on their approach path. That foxhole is pinning us down. We need it gone. Now came the order from Centurion Drake, his voice tense over the comm. Roger that. Moving into position, Titus responded, the familiar surge of adrenaline focusing his actions. He found a relatively clear line of sight, crouched and took aim. The missile launcher, a model designed for precision and destructive power, felt almost like an extension of his own body. With a calm breath that belied the chaos around him, Titus fired. The missile streaked through the air, a brief flash of light and power before it struck the foxhole with a thunderous explosion. The ground shook, more from the impact than the planet's natural tremors, and the enemy's gunfire ceased abruptly. Target down, Titus confirmed, checking his sensors to ensure no heat signatures remained. Path cleared. Good work, Miller. All units, advance, Centurion Drake commanded, the relief evident even through the static of the comm. The Marines pressed forward, moving past the smoking ruins of the foxhole. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and burnt metal, a pungent reminder of the violent intersection of technology and nature on this volatile world. As they moved deeper into the colony, the signs of the Richter Alliance's occupation became more evident: barricades, discarded equipment, and more defensive positions designed to utilize the natural choke points provided by the volcanic landscape. Each step took them further into enemy territory, but the destruction of the foxhole had given Titus and his unit a significant tactical advantage. They moved with renewed purpose, each Marine covering their sectors with disciplined precision. This is just the start, Titus muttered to himself, reloading his missile launcher for whatever came next. The initial victory was theirs, but he knew that the real battle for the colony was just beginning. As they advanced, Titus felt a cold resolve settle in his chest. This was what he was trained for, what he was here for: to fight, to win, to liberate, and he would see it through, no matter what lay ahead. The streets of the colony on Gustav-IV bore the scars of conflict. Buildings, once homes and marketplaces, now stood as battered sentinels over the narrow, debris littered lanes. The air was thick with dust, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and the sharp tang of ionized air from discharged energy weapons. Each step forward was fraught with danger, the hidden enemy waiting with bated breath. Titus led his squad with a hardened resolve, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The whir of drones overhead provided aerial reconnaissance, but in the urban maze of the colony, every shadow could conceal death. Sergeant, check those corners. Tight cover, Titus commanded as they maneuvered through a particularly narrow street flanked by high-rise buildings, a perfect ambush point. His voice was calm but carried the urgency of their perilous situation. Yes, sir, Sergeant Lin responded, her team fanning out with practiced coordination, their weapons trained on windows and doorways. As they advanced, the ominous crack of a sniper shot echoed off the concrete, a bullet whizzing dangerously close and embedding itself in the wall beside Titus's head. Sniper. Take cover, he barked, the team instantly ducking behind the remnants of a shattered wall. Eyes narrowed, Titus peered through his tactical visor, the display flickering as it attempted to lock onto the source of the shot. The sniper, hidden within the skeleton of a once proud apartment complex, was not alone. Machine gun nests were cleverly positioned to cover the streets, pinning Titus and his squad down with a hail of bullets whenever they attempted to move. We're stuck, Sir Corporal Vargas shouted over the din of gunfire. We can't move without. I know. Titus cut him off, already toggling his radio to the frequency of the support units. This is Alpha Team, requesting immediate air support at Grid 794. We have multiple hostiles, heavy fire, need strike on my mark. The request was met with a brief crackle of static before the calm voice of the operations officer responded. Alpha Team, air support inbound. ET at 2 minutes. Mark target. Titus, exposing himself for a mere second, launched a micro-flare towards the enemy positions. The bright red projectile arced perfectly, landing on the roof of the building housing the sniper. Hold tight. Air support is coming. Titus reassured his squad, hunkering down as the enemy fire intensified, trying to silence them before the strike could wipe them out. The 2 minutes stretched endlessly, every second punctuated by the zip of bullets and the thud of them hitting their makeshift barricade. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the colony, the airstrike hit. A series of explosions tore through the buildings, the force of the blasts sending shockwaves down the street. The building with the sniper and the machine gun nests crumbled, a cloud of dust and debris billowing into the air, obscuring the sun. As the dust settled, silence fell, a stark, ringing silence that resonated with the gravity of what had just occurred. Titus stood first, his figure emerging from behind the wall, surveying the destruction. "Area clear," he called out, his voice somber. The strike had saved them, but the cost was always high. Buildings that once held lives and memories were now ruins. But such was the nature of war. "Let's move out. Keep your guards up. We're not done yet," Titus instructed, leading his team forward through the devastated streets. The destruction around them was a grim reminder of their mission stakes. They were here to save lives, but the path to that salvation was paved with hardship and loss. As they continued their advance, the weight of command rested heavily on Titus's shoulders. Each decision he made carried the weight of his team's lives, each order a potential sentence. Yet, amidst the chaos and destruction, his resolve never wavered. They were here to liberate, to bring hope back to this shattered colony, and Titus would see it through to the end. The heart of the colony felt like a different world, a stark zone of silence after the cacophony of battle that raged through the outer streets. The central holding area, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings, stood ominously quiet. It was here that the colonists were believed to be detained, their fates hanging in the balance as Titus and his select team prepared to breach the perimeter. "Check your corners and watch your sectors. Expect anything," Titus instructed his team, his voice a low growl that barely rose above the whisper of the wind, stirring the dust and ash of ruined lives. His face, illuminated by the dim light of his helmet's HUD, was a mask of concentration, every line speaking of years spent in the grim business of war. The team moved with stealth, approaching the main gate of the compound. The heavy metal door stood ajar, an ominous invitation. Titus signaled to Corporal Vargas, who stepped forward with a breaching charge. The countdown was silent. The explosion controlled a precise burst that sent the door flying inward, with a clatter that echoed like a death knell in the still air. As they entered the compound, the smell of fear and desperation was palpable. The corridors were dimly lit, the air stale and heavy. Each room they cleared added weight to their burden, the absence of hostiles an eerie prelude to what they might find. "Clear," the call echoed down the hall, as each room was systematically checked and secured. Titus led from the front, his weapon at the ready, his senses tuned to the slightest hint of danger. The further they ventured into the compound, the more signs of recent occupation they found: discarded weapons, hastily abandoned meals, a child's toy lying forgotten on the floor. Each discovery tightened a knot in Titus's stomach, the silence more oppressive with each step. They reached the main holding area, a large open space converted into a makeshift prison. As Titus breached the door, the scene that unfolded before him paused, even his seasoned heart. Dozens of colonists, men, women, and children, huddled together, their faces etched with the pain of captivity and the glimmer of fading hope. "Marines," Titus called out, his voice firm, commanding presence restoring a measure of calm amid the palpable tension. "We're here to get you out. Stay calm." And the colonists stirred, their expressions mingling relief with disbelief. As his team moved in to secure the area, Titus approached a middle-aged man who seemed to be an impromptu leader of the group. "We thought no one was coming," the man said, his voice cracking with emotion. "We always come," Titus replied, his tone more gentle than usual. a rare glimpse of the man behind the soldier's facade. With the colonists secured, Titus received the radio call. He was dreading the one that confirmed the presence of remaining hostiles elsewhere in the compound. His orders were clear: no enemy was to be spared, a mandate he relayed to his team with a steely resolve. "Warm up. We have more rooms to clear," he commanded, leading his team deeper into the compound. Room by room, they engaged in swift, precise combat. Titus's experience and cold efficiency guided each movement, each decision. The hostiles, caught off guard by the Marines' relentless advance, were quickly overwhelmed. No quarter was given, no hostile spared as they methodically secured the compound. The grim task left rooms silent, the echoes of gunfire a stark contrast to the quiet sobs of relief from the colonists they had just freed. As they regrouped in the central area, Titus allowed himself a brief moment to survey the faces of those they had saved. In their eyes, he saw a reflection of all the reasons he still fought, despite the darkness he had seen. Extraction teams inbound, he reported through his comm, his voice betraying none of the weariness that tugged at his limbs. The battle for the colony's center was over, but as always, the war continued. Titus knew that each victory was just a prelude to the next challenge, each rescue a promise to continue fighting, no matter the cost. In the heart of the liberated colony center, the air was heavy with a mix of relief and the sharp tang of lingering gunpowder. Colonists, now free from their makeshift prison, clung to each other, their faces etched with the trauma of their ordeal but brightened by the sudden, sharp relief of rescue. The Marines, usually so steadfast and stoic, allowed the walls they built around themselves to crack, just for a moment, sharing in the collective exhale of those they had saved. Titus watched his team interact with the colonists, offering them water and words of comfort. The stern mask of the soldier was lifted, revealing the humans underneath the armor. One young Marine, whose first taste of combat had been the fierce fighting of the day, handed a stuffed toy back to a little girl, her grateful smile a stark contrast to the destruction around them. "Hey, Titus," called out Sergeant Lynn, her voice cutting through the muted celebrations. She held her radio handset out to him, her expression sobering. "Command's on the line." Titus took the handset, his back straightening as he prepared to switch gears back to the role of the commander. "This is Miller. Good work on securing the colony. But we've got another situation." The voice of command was clipped, businesslike. "Satellite recon spotted another enemy enclave, active on the opposite side of Gustav-IV. We need your unit to mobilize and address this threat immediately." Titus's jaw clenched, the brief moment of peace shattering like glass under the relentless pressure of war. "Understood, Command. We'll prep for immediate deployment." He handed the handset back to Lynn and turned to address his unit, gathering the Marines with a sharp whistle. "Listen up. We've got another mission. Gear up, we're moving out in 20. The Marines snapped to attention, the earlier softness hardening into the familiar focus of soldiers with a job to do. Yet there was a palpable sense of weariness that even the most disciplined stance couldn't hide. They were tired, but the call of duty was unyielding. Titus walked over to the colonists, his steps deliberate. He stopped in front of the man he'd spoken with earlier, the impromptu leader of the hostages. "We have to move out," Titus said, his voice low and not without sympathy. "But you'll be safe now. The transport ships will take you from here. You'll be okay." The man nodded, understanding flashing in his eyes, along with a flicker of something else: gratitude. "Thank you," he said, extending a hand, which Titus took, the shake firm and meaningful. Returning to his unit, Titus geared up, checking his weapons and armor with methodical precision. Around him, his squad did the same, the camaraderie of the group a silent strength that bound them together. They were more than a unit, they were a lifeline to each other in the vast, indifferent expanse of space warfare. As they loaded into the transport vehicles, Titus cast one last look at the colony center, the buildings scarred and smoldering, the ground littered with the debris of battle. It was a place marked by violence, but also by victory, however transient. The transport's engines roared to life, the sound of familiar call to arms. As the vehicle lifted off, carrying them towards the next battle, Titus felt the weight of command settle around him once more. The war was far from over, and his role in it was as unyielding as the armor he wore. But amidst the ceaseless fight, Titus held on to the brief moments of humanity, the small victories that reminded him why they fought so hard. For Titus and his Marines, the fight on Gustav-IV was just another chapter in the endless saga of war. But each chapter carried its own weight, each battle its own stories of liberation and loss. The briefing room aboard the Valiant was stark, the walls lined with screens displaying tactical data, and live feeds from drones still surveying Gustav-IV. The room buzzed with low conversation as Marines prepared for the upcoming deployment, but all fell silent when Titus walked in. His presence commanded attention, not just for his rank but for the respect he had earned through years of unwavering service. Titus stood at the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over his unit. His face showed little of what he felt. The years had taught him well how to shield his emotions from even those closest to him. Yet those who knew him knew the toll each mission took. "As you were," Titus began, his voice steady, resonating in the quiet of the briefing room. "We've got our orders. Another enclave of Richter Alliance forces has dug in on the west side of the planet. We hit them hard and fast, we disrupt their operations, and we keep the pressure until they break." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, his eyes locking with several of his troops, silently communicating his expectations. "I know today has been long. I know it's been hard," he continued, his tone slightly softer, acknowledging their fatigue without diminishing the urgency of their mission. "The victories we've had may seem hollow against the backdrop of what's cost. We've lost good people. We've had to make hard calls." Titus's hand clenched slightly at his side, the only sign of his inner turmoil. "But this is what we do. This is who we are. We're the shield that guards the realms of humanity, the sword that strikes against the darkness. We fight so that others don't have to. We bear the burden so that the Confederation and worlds beyond can sleep a little easier at night." A murmur of agreement passed through the room, a shared acknowledgement of the heavy mantle they all carried. "We'll gear up. We deploy in 30 minutes, Titus concluded, his gaze sweeping over the room one final time. "I expect everyone's a game. We leave no one behind, and we leave nothing of the enemy but memories." As the Marines dispersed to ready themselves, Titus remained behind, his eyes briefly closing as he gathered his strength. The burden of command never lightened, each decision a stone added to the load he carried. Moments later, Titus walked alone to the armory, his steps measured, his mind replaying the day's events. Each face of a fallen Marine etched itself in his memory, a grim gallery of sacrifice that pushed him forward, fueled his resolve. Once equipped, he made his way to the transport bay. The engines of the dropship hummed, a deep, resonating sound that felt like the heartbeat of the war effort. Around him, Gustav-IV's skies bled red and orange, the volcanic planet defiant under the shadow of war. Titus stepped up into the transport, his silhouette stark against the fiery backdrop, a figure shaped and continually tested by the furnace of conflict. As the transport doors sealed shut, his reflection briefly caught in the polished metal a soldier, a protector, forever bound to the cycle of war. The transport lifted off, bearing Titus and his unit toward the next confrontation, a never-ending cycle of battles fought in the name of peace and security. In the quiet before the storm, Titus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, the weight of his duty both a burden and a privilege. I hope you enjoyed this story. Be sure to leave it a like on your way out. Check out one of our other videos too, and don't forget to subscribe.